Greetings. Saludos, everyone. On behalf of the National Latino Behavioral Health Association and the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center, we welcome you to our Preventing Adverse Childhood Experience ACEs in the Hispanic and Latino communities. My name is Dolca Michelle Zelaya. I'm the project coordinator for the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center. I will be your MC for today's webinar. Before I introduce you to the presenters, here are some brief instructions about today's presentation. Next slide, please. The webinar will be recorded and archived for future playback. It will be closed captioned in Spanish and eventually also in Portuguese. The lines will be mute throughout the presentation. When we get to the QA portion of our webinar, you will have an opportunity to ask your question by typing your questions into the QA box, and I will present your question to our speakers. Although we are not providing continuing education credits for this event, we plan to do so for future events. For this webinar, we can provide you with electronic certificate of attendance with 1.5 hour credit upon request when you complete the evaluation. So let's begin. Next slide. Let's start by introducing the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center that is housed at the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, NALBA. NALBA is a nonprofit organization located in New Mexico. NALBA was established to fill out a unified voice for Latinos populations in the behavioral health arena and to bring attention to the great disparities that exist in the areas of access, utilization, practice-based research, and effectively trained personnel. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Our National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center is part of the PTTC network, which is an international multidisciplinary resource for professionals in the prevention field. Established in 1993 by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA. The PTTC network is comprised by 10 domestic regional centers, 6 international HIV centers funded by PEPFAR, 2 national focus areas, and a network coordinating office. Together, the network serves the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Pacific Islands of Guam, American Samoa, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and the Mariana Islands. The International HIV ATTC serves Vietnam, South Asia, South Africa, and Ukraine. Here you will see the map of the US-based PTTCs. The National Hispanic and Latino Prevention Technology Transfer Center has a national focus for Hispanic and Latino communities and the workforce that provides service to these communities. Next slide, please. The PTTC is staffed by Dr. Pierluigi Mancini, our project director, Priscilla Yamasi, our executive administrative assistant, and myself as project coordinator. Next slide, please. Also, we will be asking you to fill out a brief evaluation at the end of this webinar. This evaluation survey is important to the work that we do and provide us with the opportunity to improve our training efforts and secure funding to continue the work. Please take a moment to take a survey. It's very important to us. Next slide. Now it's time to introduce our esteemed presenter, Ms. Fabricia Prado. Fabricia Prado is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Georgia. She obtained her master's degree in social work from Kansas State University. Fabricia also holds a bachelor and a master's degree in psychology from the Pontifical Catholic University of Goiás in Brazil. She had been working with the Latino community in Georgia since she graduated her internship program in 2000 as an intern, then as a clinician, and later as a program manager of telecounseling programs at SETA. Fabricia is also a member of ALA's board, Asociación Latinoamericana para la Salud, a nonprofit organization in Douglasville, Georgia, dedicated to advocating for finding and assisting members of the Latino communities in Georgia. Currently, Fabricia has been working with the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC and our sister center, the ATTC, under their cultural and linguistic approach to extend the training resources and webinars to include Brazilian, Portuguese, and Spanish. Fabricia has obtained certification on ACES Interface Master Trainer through the National Hispanic and Latino Prevention TTC, and is working to increase community awareness and prevalence of ACEs and its public health impact, utilizing evidence-based approaches for building resiliency in the Hispanic and Latino organizations and communities. Fabricia, we want to welcome you. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to conduct this webinar. Please proceed with your presentation, and welcome again.
Thank you, Dr. Mancini, and all National Hispanic and Latino PTTC team. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm very grateful for speaking about this important topic today and for having been offered this opportunity by this PTTC to join the training, the ACE Interface Master Training last year, presented by Laura Porter, Kathy, and Dr. Rob Anda. Whether you are a mental health counselor, a teacher, a prevention specialist, maybe a war veteran, a parent, a religious or community leader, or whatever your interest is in attending this webinar, I want you to thank you for being here. It means a lot to me that people like you made this choice to join me in learning more about adverse childhood experiences and building self-healing communities. Now, before we begin, I'd like to tell you something. There are right now more than 400 people logged into this webinar. Just imagine that. Imagine everyone in their home, office, cars, on their laptops, phones, listening to the same things you're going to listen right now. This means that even though we cannot see each other, we are all connected by something that we must have in common in order to be here. So you are not alone on this. And I am here now, fully present in this very moment, and I would like to invite you to do just the same. From me and from the slides you start seeing on your screen, you can expect that this journey we will enter together will be respectful, gentle, and considerate of your own journey and where you might be in your stage of self-awareness and healing processes as it relates to this topic. From you, I expect that you be focused if you can, and that you take care of yourself for the next hour and a half that we're going to be together, and also later on. To give you some ideas of things that you can do to make you feel calmer in your body and in the present moment, I put together some grounding exercises that I learned in my EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing training, and in other books and other trainings that I have practiced myself and with clients as well. You are invited to try them if you feel comfortable to do so. The first one is called the butterfly hug, in which you make a butterfly with your hands by interlocking your thumbs as you see in the picture, and over your chest with fingers pointing the neck, you flap the wings by tapping left, right, either on your chest or as a hug to yourself on your arms, as you can see in the picture. This is bilateral stimulation for the right and left brain hemispheres integration, and can also be reached by dancing movements, drumming, swimming, etc. Notice that I have a half smile there, but I was not smiling to look cute in the picture. I was intentionally practicing another technique used in dialectical behavior therapy called half smile. While I was doing the butterfly, I like to use the half smile because I see instant change in my mood. You just hold this half smile and breathe for a couple of minutes or 10 minutes if you can. The second one is just feeling your feet touching the ground, touching the floor. And you may tap your feet on the ground, you breathe, you remember that you are in the present moment, you are in the now. And if you can, you also can use a pillow, preferably a heavy pillow, and put it on your lap or on your back or over your shoulders. And then you feel a little bit of pressure that helps you to settle and calm down. The third one, you activate blood flow in the prefrontal cortex by applying light pressure with your fingertips on the midway between your hairline and eyebrows, over the midpoint of each eyebrow, as you see in the picture, or simply placing your palm on your forehead, as you see. If you feel that these exercises are not right for you, then please simply take some deep breaths. Other things you can do for self-care now and after this webinar is to have a comfy blanket, warm tea, maybe some plants around you or your pet. You may color as we listen, or anything else that pleases you. Remember, you can also choose to mute myself temporarily, nobody you see, or you can choose to do what you need for your well-being. Now, I invite you to please participate in this baseline polling question. How familiar are you with understanding what is adverse childhood experiences, which I'm going to refer to ACEs from now on, and its overall impact on population health? Please choose A if you have never heard, don't know the implications. B if you have some idea but don't know the implications. C if you have a clear idea but haven't used in your daily work. And D if you can explain it well and you also have incorporated this knowledge on your work. And I'll give you a few seconds. I still don't see the, okay. So as a result, we have that 10% of you selected A, 20% B, 41% C, and 29% D. That means that most of you have a clear idea about what ACEs are, but haven't really used this knowledge in your daily work. Let's proceed. And thank you for participating. So here's an overview of today's webinar. Please be aware that this is a 1-hour webinar, which is a very short version of a much longer presentation. In part 1, we will talk about the ACE study and why it matters. In part 2, we will adventure in the brain and what happens there when you go through adversities. And I would like to give a special attention for part 3, resilience, because here's where we rise together as the resilient people that we are. I also chose this quote because it sets the tone for the journey we are about to begin. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at the broken places. This quote brings to my mind that image of a cracked vase with light passing through the cracks. Do you know why sometimes a crisis is very rich in meaningful opportunity in our lives? I believe that this is because it brings us to that aha moment. Ah, look at everything I went through in my life making sense right now. Can some of us Latinx immigrants in the US experience this today, even considering the pandemic context? Absolutely. We have been prepared for this, for the survival mode, for the compassionate, generous mode of reaching out and taking care of our most beloved vulnerable ones. Also, because of our value of respeto, you know what I'm talking about. Those seeds of the most loving and caring type of love that comes from our grandparents. They never die. We are all carriers of their seeds and will forever spread them wherever we are. I believe that this type of love is the most powerful force in the universe. And this is not only for the Hispanic and Latinx around the world. This is all of us. Just watch it with eyes of curiosity and wonder, and you see the best of human race happening in the heart of chaos. Today, I'd like to dedicate this presentation to all the grandparents in the world, nuestros abuelos y abuelas. Let's move on. So the ACE study. I will be saying ACEs to refer to adverse childhood experiences. And when I say adversity here, think about a type of experience or stress response that can be understood as being toxic to us. There are life stressors that can activate positive or tolerable responses in our brain and bodies. But there are experiences that, depending on a number of factors, such as the age of when that happened, gender, environmental conditions, individual vulnerabilities or differences, and especially the duration and intensity of these experiences, that they can be imprinted as toxic to us, causing changes in our brain architecture and resulting in trauma. Just to clarify, when I use the term adversity, I'm not necessarily talking about the nature of the event or life experience, such as war or poverty. But I'm talking about the effects of such events in our neurobiology, our overall health, and in our environment, being transmitted through generations, including the deep-rooted systems of oppression and its microaggressions traumas, commonly experienced by some minority groups as the Latinx immigrants living in the US. I'm going to share with you findings from the ACE study. This study confirms with scientific evidence that adversity early in life increases physical, mental, and behavior problems later. This is the largest study of its kind with over 17,000 participants. It was developed and co-sponsored by Kaiser Permanente of California and the CDC of Atlanta in the early 90s. Dr. Vincent Filetti and Dr. Rob Anda are the co-principal investigators of the ACE study. Dr. Anda, who designed the ACE study while he was working as a senior scientist at the CDC, reviewed and approved all the information from the study that I report to you today. This slide shows the 10 categories of ACEs that were studied. The CDC now tracks 8 across multiple states. The types of neglect were excluded. The first group refer to household dysfunction, this one to the left. That includes growing up with substance abusing household members, alcohol or drugs, parental separation or divorce, growing up with a household member or caregivers who are struggling with mental illnesses, witnessing intimate partner violence, specifically against the mother, or criminal behavior as evidenced by having a household member imprisoned. 3 forms of childhood abuse were studied: emotional, physical, and sexual. And 2 forms of neglect were included: emotional and physical. The questions used in this study, and they were all adults, were introduced with the phrase, while you were growing up during your first 18 years of life, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, shove, or slap you? Or often or very often hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? So this is just an example for physical abuse. So all the 10 questions were elaborated in this manner. As you can see from the percentages of this slide, ACEs are common, and this was a middle-class, well-educated population. The ACE study is ongoing, and it has been adapted and expanded as well. Many states, including Georgia, since 2018, have continuously collected information about ACEs through the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, the BRFSS. And major findings from this data are similar to that one of the original ACE study. If you visit the CDC website, you'll find a great number of resources. Because adverse childhood experiences are so highly interrelated, it did not make sense to look at how single categories of ACEs influenced health and social problems. Instead, doctors and Filetti developed an ACE score. So each category counts as 1 point. So the ACE score is simply the sum of each category reported from 0 to 10. So if a person experienced physical abuse, no matter the severity or how many times, the ACE score is 1, and so forth. Think of the ACE score as a measure of the childhood biologic stress dose. As the ACE score goes up, on average, the exposure to the developmental effects of toxic stress increases. Here you can see that only a third of people in the study had an ACE score of 0. 16% had scores of 4 or more. ACEs are common, and they tend to cluster. Now, look at this graph. What you see here is an illustration of the dose-response relationship. More ACEs, more health and social problems. The next one, it's specifically about ACEs and depression. Depression is the leading cause of disability in developed countries. Here we see that the ACE scores goes up, so does the risk of depression in a dose-response fashion. The CDC Vital Signs report of November of last year states that preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. ACEs are held in the body, leading to mental, physical, behavioral health problems in adulthood. Some of those problems are unintentionally handed to the next generation. Struggling with a substance use disorder or suffering from depression are a part of the intergenerational transmission of ACEs. The next one is showing one of the strongest relationships seen in the ACE study, and this is between ACEs and the risk of suicide attempts. People with an ACE score of 4 have almost 20 times the risk of suicide attempt as people with an ACE score of 0. But please remember, ACEs are not a destiny. Now, we can see how ACEs can be related to certain behaviors and social conditions. Please look at the first set of columns and compare the dark blue column representing 4 or more ACEs and the lightest blue column representing 0 ACEs. Here, we see the risk of developing a substance use disorder being increased by 6 times from an ACE score of 0 to an ACE score of 6. What about relationships? People with higher ACE scores are more likely to marry a person with a substance use disorder. Think for a minute how these indicate that ACEs tend to be transmitted from one generation to the next. And here is a list of some of the health and social problems documented by ACE study publications. The CDC estimates that at least 5 out of the top 10 leading causes of death are associated with ACEs. And this should lead to thinking about prevention. More than ever before, we're living in a time with enormous potential for shifting the trajectory of health and well-being for generations to come if we focus on the right factors responsible for our well-being. If we understand the universal rules of our interdependence, if we recognize the power and the value that lays in our capacity to build resilience when we come together. And this is why it is so important to act on closing the gap and reducing the health disparities that set us apart, so every member of society can be healthy and healed and contribute with their full potential to our collective success, which is indeed the only form of success if we recognize that we are connected with one another. And this idea of individual success is, in fact, an illusion. Look at the dreamers for a minute. How easy it is or should be to admit that they are brilliant young people full of potential to give back to society and so on. Most likely, legislation that supports their in-state tuitions, pathway to citizenship, and etc. are or will be eventually in their favor, hopefully. They are in certain ways in a more privileged position than the other folks in their communities. Let's say the first in line, and they should be. But who raised them? Let's think about their parents and grandparents and communities. What a powerful social net they have relied on to support them. These people, who are not necessarily the most well-liked folks, they have the brilliance of their kids to show how well-equipped they can be with tools that no books, no academic background, wealth, or social status can provide. So they are deserving of it too. They have tremendous value. So how do we put all this together to make a case for preventing ACEs and their intergenerational transmission as the greatest opportunity for improving the well-being of human populations? This slide shows the percentage of various health and social problems that epidemiologists estimate are caused by ACEs. The calculation they use is called population attributable risk, which is represented by the oil spill on the slide. This means that by preventing ACEs, we are potentially preventing or reducing this amount of problems and many others all at once. So look, for example, they score for life dissatisfaction, 67%, or you may want to look at marijuana use, 54%, anxiety, 55%. So they're all these high percentages that are found to be associated with ACEs. So no matter if you're working to prevent heart disease or cancer, and homelessness or addictions, or improve business profitability, we can align a portion of our work around a common goal of preventing the accumulation of ACEs and moderating their effects. So by now, you must be thinking, what about the additional stressors experienced by the Latinx immigrants in the United States? So here I put together some of the additional stressors that we need to take into consideration when working with Latinx families. For example, trauma experienced during pre-migration, migration, and post-migration. Pre-migration. How many stories I have heard, and maybe possibly you too, in the community and from my clients, and even my own story, having stayed with my siblings when my mom migrated here years before me. One of the parents or both migrate before their children. Many adolescents clients I worked with who came after maybe 5 or 10 years or even more after being apart from their parent and arriving here with almost no English to adjust to their parent, new family, new baby siblings, step parent, and so forth. And on top of that, all the following that you see in the list to cause an impact of such additional stressors on their mental health, which just made sense with how they were feeling and how overwhelming it is. When I worked with the telecounseling grant, we reached out to people who were in more rural, underserved communities. So we ended up serving some people who were categorized as refugees and asylum seekers. And their stories were the most vivid examples of the hardships someone can endure before, during, and then after their arrival. People who nearly died for more than once, people who were so scared and reported fleeing incredible levels of violence. Did I experience secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue? Certainly, but this is another extensive subject. In a study by Pereira and Ornelas with a random sample of 281 foreign-born adolescents and their parents, 29% of adolescents and 34% of foreign-born parents experienced trauma during the migration process. Among those, 21% of parents and 9% of adolescents were at high risk for PTSD. Does it mean that they will develop PTSD? Not necessarily. We need to combine not only the experiences during migration, but before it and after it that will contribute to the development of PTSD or not, and other factors as well, like the environment. Detention centers at the border. We all know this humanitarian crisis. Family separations, no plan for reunification of families, the lack of proper medical treatment, child deaths, multiple types of toxic stress. I have worked with a client, a minor who was an asylum seeker and passed alone through all these experiences. From this client's trauma narrative, the detention center phase was the client's experience that was as related to his current PTSD symptoms as prior traumatic experiences. Unstable living situations. This also happens in other places, and the lack of stable work and the basic needs will definitely be part of this experience. Similar situation is actually happening in Brazil with the migration of Venezuelans. My brother has been in Manaus recently, and he's making a documentary film that you report on this. Then we have acculturative stress. Basically, this is adjusting and adapting to a new world, a new culture, language, lifestyle. In an interesting study by Ardona and colleagues comparing acculturative stress and with documented and undocumented immigrants, Latinos in Texas, found out that fear of deportation was at the same level for both groups and were a unique predictor of both extrafamilial and intrafamilial stress related to acculturation. Perceived discrimination and neighborhood disorders. So this includes experiencing or witnessing discrimination, direct or subtle threats of harm, humiliation, and intimidation that can be fueled by perceptions about anti-migration immigration policies, and illustrated by racial insults such as "you're not from here," "go back to where you came from," and other forms of explicit verbal and physical violence that to save us from here, I won't repeat. Conflicts with parents about acculturation. So this is also very common and very well reported in the literature as one of the factors that contributes to mental health problems. The language barrier between parents and their children, for instance, is commonly observed in the clinical setting. As a clinician, many times in family sessions, it was not unusual having to mediate and translate conversations between children and parents, adolescents and parents. Okay, so here are some disturbing drawings from migrant children at the border, representing this unique set of violent childhood adversities that have been imposed on them. The American Psychiatric Association recognizes that the impact of separating immigrant families and indefinite detention is widespread, long-term, and harmful to physical, mental, and emotional childhood trauma. Next, you can see a table from a study with a sample of 1,093 high school seniors from urban, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities that participated in a follow-up 2 years later, reporting overall high rates of ACEs. 11% of the sample reported being of Hispanic or Latinx origin. This table includes information for lifetime experience of the 10 ACEs, broken down by gender and race and ethnicity, as you can see. The most commonly reported ACE was parental separation, 27.5%. At least 1 out of 7 respondents reported experiencing a number of things like an unemployed parent, a parent with a drinking or drug problem, or witnessing injury or murder. The responses of whites for parents having a drink or drug problem was about 50% higher than it was for Blacks and 30% higher than what was reported by Hispanics. So the two categories where Hispanics reported higher rates than whites were witnessing a serious injury or murder, a rate twice as high, and being threatened with a weapon, held captive, or kidnapped. This was 43% higher than what was reported by whites and almost 2 times higher than what was reported by blacks. And next, we have a study conducted with 1,420 participants to examine substance use and Hispanics in Southern California. As you can see in this table, the number of ACEs was significantly associated with each category of substance use. A difference in the number of ACEs from 0 to 8 was associated with a 22% higher probability of cigarette smoking, a 24% higher probability of binge drinking, a 31% higher probability of marijuana use, and a 12% higher probability of hard drug use, respectively. Specifically, verbal and physical abuse were associated with drinking, cigarette use, marijuana, and hard drug use. And parental separation or divorce was associated with cigarette and marijuana use. Excuse me, I actually clicked on the link. Okay, now please, let's take a deep breath. And then I will ask you to participate in this new polling question. True or false? Children in Hispanic immigrant families living under the poverty line in the US have a higher prevalence of ACEs exposure in comparison to children in US native families. True or false? Okay, 91% of you said true and only 9% false. So I raised this question just to mention an interesting finding of a study by Caballero and colleagues that concluded that actually children in immigrant families had significantly lower odds of ACE exposure despite higher prevalence of poverty when compared with children in US native families. This was around 80% versus 47%. And 30% of children in US native families reported high ACEs compared with only 16% of children in immigrant families. However, this may not reflect a true health advantage in this population. There may be factors not measured and they may buffer the exposure of those children to ACEs. And later, when you talk about resilience, we can talk more about what these buffers may be. And additionally, the questions themselves may fail to capture the specific experiences with adversities from this population. Interesting, right? Please keep in mind that we have been talking about highly complex social issues, and this is not an attempt to provide simple solutions for them. Okay, as we transition to the second part of this presentation, when you're going to talk a little bit about the brain, let's take another deep breath, or you may decide to practice those self-soothing and grounding techniques while you look at this image of new life and hope. Let's talk about what happens in the brain when we experience ACEs. We know that our childhood memories are stored in our bodies and not just in our minds. prevention looks to root causes and conditions to explain current problems. In the case of trauma, it looks human neurobiology. Our nervous system can be both a source of risk and a source of solutions. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord that integrate all of our senses and information from receptors located throughout the human body. The nervous system considers sensory input in the context of each and every second, almost instantaneously, and determines our understanding of and response to the world we live in. And our neurons are highly effective at processing and transmitting information with an important purpose in doing so, to adapt in ways that keep us alive. Dr. Martin Teicher of Harvard University reviewed and approved all of the brain science facts in this presentation. So, why does trauma in childhood have such an impact? Let's begin to understand. Here in this picture, you can see a set of neurons. If you see the one to the left, this is what they might look like at the time of birth. Then the next one during elementary age and puberty. Note that there aren't many connections at birth. Babies are born with only the connections and brain functions they need at that point in life. Most of the wiring of our brains occurs as the result of life experience from our senses. By age 6, those same brain cells now have many connections. The wiring of the brain is experience dependent. What gets experienced the most tends to lead to more stronger connections between the nerve cells that form these networks. And this process is called branching or arborization. The last section on the right represents age 14. Notice that there are now fewer connections. Why? Because the least experienced connections tend to withdraw at this time in a process called pruning. This phenomenon helps to explain why neglect or not getting the experiences we need can have such a powerful negative impact on health and social functioning. But again, remember, this is not a destiny. The same way this can happen, positive connections can be formed as well. Now you see, as the brain develops, there are sensitive periods for each brain region when the size and functional abilities of the brain are most affected by experience and most vulnerable to toxic stress. One of those elaborate systems is the limbic system. The limbic system functions we'll focus on now is the ability to regulate hormones, mood, heartbeat, and sexual behavior. This is vital for learning, memory, and real-world reinforcement processes that help us stay on a healthy track. This is very important in our system of fight or flight, our response to danger. The hippocampus and amygdala are two regions in the limbic system that are vital for forming healthy relationships. They regulate panic, fear, and a whole range of emotional responses. They help us regulate emotional outbursts when we need to. Toxic stress in early childhood has profound effects on brain structures and functions, as we have been saying. The elaborate signaling system in our brains determines in a fraction of a second when the information comes from sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell, when it comes into the brain and then it's if should be processed or if this information must be filtered out in favor of survival. So stress may be interpreted by the brain as something we can tolerate or as something that is overwhelming. Humans are only really made to be under stress for about 20 minutes at a time, long enough to prepare for a fight or to hide. Imagine that. So experiences that cause stress chemicals to be continuously produced, for example, child abuse, neglect, or even being in a war zone, or have a big, or maybe living in a very dangerous and unsafe situation like we're living now, they can have a big impact on development. And here we're talking about in childhood when we're developing this. Under these circumstances, our bodies tend to prepare for life in a dangerous world. And we may also struggle to turn the system off when we are adults, which is part of what happens when we develop PTSD. Our bodies in this system is always on, hijacking our bodies with the stress hormones for continuous, prolonged time. And this can be very stressful for the body. For example, people who have had traumatic stress from conception to the toddler years will likely have a higher baseline of the stress hormones like cortisol in their bodies. As a result, these folks may have a very short fuse, be self-focused, and may have a difficult time shifting gears from emotion to problem solving. If there is more danger just around the corner, being focused on others and thinking through options wouldn't contribute to survival. So when I asked you to practice the grounding exercises, we are basically trying to help when you do the holding the neurovascular points, for example, we are trying to activate blood flow in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us to make decisions, to think, to reason about things. So it's more like a top-down solution to help us calm down this primitive brain that's activated. So the downside that happens with the stress hormones like cortisol hang around for a long time is that they are toxic to brain cells. And this toxicity includes making it difficult for brain cells to develop healthy neural networks and can even cause brain cells to die. This is why we call continuous stress, trauma, and episodic unpredictable stress, toxic stress. Okay, because of time, I will accelerate a little bit and forgive me for that when I'm talking about epigenetics, because we still have resilience to go. So just please hang in there and take care of yourself. Now, when you talk about epidemiology, we can add to all this previous information the ability of our cells to read the messages on our genes and how this is influenced by our experiences. Scientists have discovered that responses to stress may be passed from one generation to the next. So one interesting study conditioned rats to be afraid of the smell of cherry blossoms. When the cherry blossom odor came into the rats' environment, they huddled together, stunned with fear until the odor was removed. These rats had pups who grew up without any exposure to cherry blossoms. This generation of rats were separated from their parents and placed into a different environment. When the smell of cherry blossoms was put into their environment, the rats were jumpy. They had heightened sensitivity to the smell of cherry blossoms. So this shows how the field of epigenetics may help us understand how groups of people may be deeply affected by historical trauma, despite current efforts to care for one another well. How well our ancestors can heal their wounds. We may not fully know the answer to that question, but we do know that we are the ones responsible today because we are the adults living in the present, in the now. So let's think again about the positive side of experience being passed from one generation to the next. Scientists are testing whether positive characteristics like nurturing behavior can be inherited from one's parents and grandparents. The field of epigenetics provides us with hope that our ways of relating to one another can create lasting positive changes in genetic expression. Wow, how wonderful. And creating self-healing communities and lay an enduring path of generational healing and recovery. So we are building capacity, community capacity now, and this may be passed to the next generations. Okay, let's move on. Now you can relax and take a deep breath. We're going to talk about resilience. So if you can, please, if you can read this that you see in your screen, you can read it out loud for yourself or in silence. And I'll give you some time to read what you see in those slides. Relationships with caring and competent people are vital contributors to resilience and recovery. How powerful this is, right? When you hear people, when people hear about the ACE study findings, they often ask about resilience. Our desire for resilience leads naturally to a search for ways to help families and communities. So here we can see the three protective systems that interact and guide positive adaptation. These powerful systems are individual capabilities, attachment and belonging with caring and competent people, and protective community, faith, and cultural processes. What we know about individuals who do well despite adversity. I'm sure we may be asking that. Why some people do well, why some people struggle. We know that the three protective systems are nested. People do best when they're living in thriving families and communities. We can help one another to develop personal attributes that help us all weather the life storms. Personal attributes or individual capabilities like positive views of one's life, self-efficacy, and self-regulation are all discussed at length in the resilience literature. The second protective system we can nurture is belonging. Many people talk about the importance of people in their lives. People who recognize and encourage our unique talents, interests, and strengths. Relationships with caring and competent people will and contribute to resilience and recovery. Sometimes this message gets shortened and only includes caring relationships, but competency requires learning new skills and practicing safety in all of its forms when relating to people, and people who are hardwired for survival in a dangerous or unpredictable world. People who have difficulty with emotional regulation, picking up social cues, problems with addiction and family bonds, and other consequences of developmental trauma can be challenging friends and neighbors. Relationships that provide security and belonging, you become the norm as we learn and improve our skills and competencies to be relevant and helpful during times of stress and challenge, as well as during celebration and rest. This is very useful for all of us right now. And I will talk about it soon. Communities are powerful. When communities engage in capacity building, they dig deep into the human experiences that have shaped their past and influenced the present. From generation to generation, people pass their history of experience, including its rich heritage, language, and traditions, and also its experience of historic trauma, slavery, racism, injustice. While the ACE study didn't measure historic trauma like slavery or children being taken from their parents and forced to deny their culture and language, neurobiology research would suggest that these and other traumatic experiences that elevate stress hormones for long periods of time during childhood development would have enduring effects. But for every trauma history, there is also a survival history, a history of resilience. Cultural continuity, including reclaiming cultural ways after a time of loss, is a powerful driver of well-being. And I would ask you, what is known to build resilience? What is known in the Hispanic and Latinx communities as a very important fact to build resilience? And I will leave you with that question. But I can anticipate based on other experiments and experiences from people from other states, for example, feeling socially and emotionally supported are hopeful. Being able to count on other adults in a variety of ways. This is about reciprocity. How adults in a neighborhood or community pitch in to help and be helped and look out for one another's families. And I'm sure you can see this in the news, on TV, and we are living this right now. And this is the fourth factor that is the hardest kind of social capital to build. It's written about extensively in the disaster preparedness literature, and it is called social bridging. When communities have high levels of social bridging, they are better able to recover after a natural disaster. So, what is social bridging? Think of the circle of people you count on for help and support. How common is it for one of you to reach outside your circle to someone you don't know well to bring help into your circle? How common is it to reach outside your circle to give help? This reaching across usual social groups is social bridging. We see this everywhere right now. We see this on TV, we're living this. My friend from Italy, my sister friend, just shared with me via WhatsApp this post shared on social media that says, China sent medical masks to Italy and wrote on the boxes a quote of a Roman poem. We are waves from the same sea. Japan, donating supplies to China, wrote on the boxes a quote of a Chinese poem. We have different mountains and rivers, but we share the same sun, moon, and sky. This is a phenomenon you and me and the entire world are living right now. We have this power. We were prepared for that. So here we can see, actually I passed, I go back. Excuse me for a moment. I'm sorry, I kind of messed up here. I'm trying to go back. Okay, I got it. So here is just part of the process to support self-healing communities. What does it involve? It involves expanding leadership, engaging key people in your communities that are affected by ACEs. It involves developing a common language and a common understanding. It involves learning communities, training communities, educating everyone, and as results, giving all we know now. What legacy will we create? So what's the outcome that we are going to be focusing on? Here we have some core principles of trauma-informed systems of care. I just added this slide here because this would be like, what is next? Okay, so we know about ACEs, we know about self-healing communities. How do we implement this? How do we act on this? So we start by riding the journey from becoming trauma aware to trauma sensitive, to trauma responsive, and then to trauma informed. And this is not in the individual level. This is a system level, a system of care level. And some of the core principles that we need to consider when we implement that are safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. And I must move on because of time. Here I added some updates, some uplifting, good, positive news of things that are happening everywhere in the Latinx community. Like there's so many programs, so many organizations that are doing amazing work in building these self-healing communities. This can be done by enhancing multiple protective factors, like creating home visiting programs. They are known for the positive results. The nurse-family partnership program, the parent training and family support programs, creating workforce education. There are also some examples from Resilient Georgia, who is creating coalition in the entire state. I've participated through the ALAS organization. I was able to participate in their last meeting, where they were sharing the amazing things that they have been doing throughout the state in Athens, Savannah, and implementing programs involving school-based mindfulness, teen mental health allies in schools, creating mindfulness zones, and resilience training. There is a lot of tools, essential tools such as education, teaching, training, policy straightening, practical research and evaluation. So we can have you see more slides where you can have all these additional resources to you. I added them in the presentation, okay? So here is just some additional information from the CDC in how to prevent childhood abuse in Black. So it all starts by the needs assessment of the local community you work with. We need to ask, what is causing ACEs here? And then create a plan and strategies that you address them, always using a strengths perspective, always finding what the community has and the strengths and how we can use those strengths. We are all leaders. We all have a contribution to make to the world to become a better place. The adversities of today can be used to make us better. It's an awakening. It is a call to pause, to connect, to feel and reflect on the direction that we want to take as habitants of this planet. So thank you so much for your time. And here we end the presentation.
Thank you, Fabricia. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move to the QA portion. And we have a full house, but we're going to try to answer with the time that we have left some of the questions. If you have a question, please type in the QA portion. And we're going to read those questions to Fabricia. So far, we have two questions, and this is for Regina Morales. She say, Fabricia, do you say that ACEs increases in developed countries?
Well, what we saw in one of the studies is that the number of ACEs, you know, the total score of ACEs can be higher, you know, depending on factors such as poverty. There are some environmental factors from underdeveloped countries that can contribute and cause ACEs to happen, right? We see this with the health disparities in a different number of contexts. But in certain studies here in the United States with populations that were under poverty, not necessarily, that's the answer, not necessarily poverty, if that's what you mean, it's a determinant of health. There are other factors, and there are structural factors, there are individual factors, environmental factors, and a number of other things to consider in order to say that. I just brought up that particular study because I knew that would be controversial, because of course we expect that with poverty and other variables that comes with that, this ACEs will be more frequent.
Thank you, Fabricia. Now we have a question from Alfredo Aguirre in reference to additional trauma. How does one differentiate a cultural stress from conflict with parents? Reference acculturation. Assume the accultural stress has more to do with internal dynamics and identities?
Okay, accultural stress and?
In comparison with acculturative stress from parents.
Okay, yes, one is intrafamilial and the other one is extrafamilial, right? Like there is the acculturative stress when you have to adjust and adapt, when you are immersed in a new world and you have to face a new language, you have to face a new lifestyle and culture. And there's also the acculturation and the differences that happen in this process inside the families. And in my experience, for example, working with adolescents and families, this was very evident how common it is that the adolescents will adjust and acculturate in a speed that is different from their parents. And even with language, create conflicts because the parent, and also assimilation. I'm bringing up assimilation because sometimes parents, grandparents will assimilate less from that new culture versus the younger, um, the, versus the kids who will be younger when they come here, when they're immersed in this new culture. And then when you put them together, like in a family session, when the issues come up, there are a lot of issues that refer to that conflict that comes from how both groups experience acculturation, and when they are living together, when they are interacting their familial relationship.
Fabricia, I want to tell you something that we have in the chat. We have several comments thanking you for sharing your knowledge and experience. Everybody is very grateful for this excellent presentation. We have several comments in our chat and we appreciate that. So now
Thank
we
you.
have a question from Patricia Gonzalez. She said that we are trying to implement ACEs support in our domestic violence shelter. We
Mm-hmm.
have a unique and excellent opportunity to support the children in shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Not only have these children have been displaced, but they also witness to domestic violence, and chances are they are victims of physical child abuse. Can you
Mm-hmm.
please refer me to resources that I can utilize in our shelter?
Yes, definitely. I would love to do that. And this is a very important, hard work. To my experience, even personal experience, going through domestic violence, witnessing domestic violence as a child or adolescent, can really cause a lot of effects and potentially trauma and PTSD. This setting of work in domestic violence shelters, it's a very difficult one. I have worked with clients, especially women in shelters, and we do have to work. I understand that you want to focus on the children, but you definitely need to work and heal the parents and work together with them. One thing that is I share that's just a dream that I have is I've danced flamenco for a long time ago, and I love dancing, and I'm going back to not actually flamenco, but one day my dream is that I would like to bring something like that. And dancing, remember, dancing offers bilateral stimulation. Dancing offers like body movement can, can have a highly potential healing. I'm sorry, a high healing potential. And I just imagined and dreaming like bringing something like that to a shelter, and where moms and daughters and sons, could dance together in this healing process of incorporating even, traditional folk dancing, and in the process of healing from this type of trauma. But I will share with you, Patricia, right? I will share with you resources to work with that in this setting. And thank you for asking.
And again, I'm going to ask everybody to be patient with us. Probably we are not going to be able to answer all the questions that are posted, but we are going to do a follow-up via email, trying to answer all the questions that we have today. Now we have a question from Luz Angela Ventura. He said, do you have recommendations to address the discomforts caused on individuals when the ACEs information is shared?
Could you repeat, please, information to, I didn't
Yes, he
understand the
said,
first part, I'm sorry.
no problem. Do you have some recommendation to address the discomfort
Mm.
caused on
Mm-hmm.
individuals with ACEs information is shared?
Okay, that's a
When
great
ACEs
question.
information is shared?
Yes, that's a great question. This is part of being trauma informed. This is part of understanding, fully understanding what trauma is about. And if you were present during the beginning of this presentation, I intentionally added those grounding techniques. And remember, this is a very short presentation and I can't give enough time to practice and to actually do the activities. But especially if you can present that with more time, I would suggest that you definitely incorporate some grounding, self-care, and some self-soothing techniques to help people throughout the presentation. I know that ACEs just hearing some things can be triggers for some trauma responses that we may present. I can talk for myself, like I have been several trainings, even in grad school, when I was triggered and I didn't know what to do at that time. I've seen so many people just beside me being triggered. This happens all the time. So it is our responsibility to make sure that we are conducting things in a way that is aware and sensitive and responsive and informed to how we conduct those trainings. Another example is if you see, another recommendation is you notice that I didn't ask anybody to complete an ACE score. And that's another thoughtfulness, another sensitivity that you can have. If, for example, in this structure, in this setting that I'm doing this right now, I'd not do that. I'd not even ask people to do it at home. So there are many points to consider in respect to avoid re-traumatizing people. And this is what we talk about in building trauma-informed systems of care. You want to avoid re-traumatizing people, and you want to give people tools like what to do when we feel like that. And I say this, I'm saying people, but this is us, all of us. We all have experienced ACEs, and we need that.
Thank you, thank you. We're going to have one more question, and this is for Danielle. He said, given that the most are working with families by phone right now, how we can recognize, assess ACEs, and build resilience right now?
I'm so sorry, but again, the beginning, I quite get what you said in the beginning.
Say, give me 1 second. I lost the question.
I'm so sorry, Doc. And
No.
part of this is because of my headset.
No problem. Let me find it. Okay, I didn't find it. I lost it. But we're gonna read one more. Does ACEs differ in second, third generation Latinx communities?
Look, I don't have studies to say that, or this is an interesting question. Like I haven't seen any study, any research, anything done with that respect. But definitely, if you think about pre-migration, migration, and post-migration, we may have some idea of how these can be different and how the experiences from second and third generation will be different. And also we have to consider the transmission, how they are transmitted. But that's a very interesting question, and I don't have data, I don't have information about that.
Thank you. Okay, Fabricia, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Thank you so much for reminding us that and to honor our grandparents and elders. I think also for reminding us the importance of resilience, especially when we are living some uncertain times and moments. So thank you so much for giving us those tools to keep going. And now we going to go back to share with you a few resources. Next slide, please. Here is our contact information in case you want to reach us and you want to request any free and technical assistance. This is our contact information. You can contact us at any time. Next slide, please. And here is some of the opportunities that we want to share with you. We are hosting a conference September 16 to the 18 in Los Angeles, California. This is our very first conference that we are providing, the 2020 Latino Behavioral Health Conference, Shaping the Vision of Latino Behavioral Health Equity. So we want to invite you. This is our page. You can visit and get registered. Right now, the call for proposal are open and also the registration. Next slide, please. And we want to remind you that the importance of complete the evaluation. Please help us. This is very important to us, and we appreciate your support in completing this evaluation. Next slide, please. And again, we want to thank you for participating. We're gonna try to respond all the questions that were pending, and have a wonderful afternoon or wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.